and I think this cycle takes us to 200 or 300K, then you're going to see Bitcoin going to 1 million or 2 million. I mean, it's hyper Bitcoinization, really. It's going to 10x and then it's going to 10x again. So, I mean, from an investing point of view, you don't want to miss something that's going to go up 100x and maybe 1,000x if you talk 15, 20 years out. People don't understand the value of compounding something at, 20, 30, 40% a year over a bunch of years. I mean, this is how great fortunes are built. And, some people have called me a doomer for, saying hyperinflation is in our future. I mean, and obviously hyperinflation will be very painful, and I'm not rooting for that, but, and I'm not a doomer. I'm very optimistic on how the world will work and look once we get through this broken money period that we're in. But we do have to get to the other side, and getting from here to the other side is likely to be unpleasant.
Analysts believe Bitcoin could hit $200,000, $300,000 this cycle, setting up a path toward $1, 2 million long-term. Despite volatility and crash fears, figures like Raoul and Larry Lepard remain bullish, pointing to liquidity cycles, institutional demand, and nation-state adoption. Lepard highlights Bitcoin's fixed supply as the ultimate shield against debasement, calling it true, digital scarcity. With ETFs driving inflows and governments slowly acknowledging its value, he sees adoption accelerating toward critical mass. Liquidity expansion remains the key driver, with Bitcoin and Ethereum benefiting first before altcoins join the rally. With leaders like Saylor and Cathie Wood projecting seven-figure prices, the long-term case for exponential growth looks stronger than ever.
You've got a chance to buy this 15 years in, for something that could last hundreds, if not 1,000 plus years. I mean, you're not too late. You're really not too late. So my view is, buy what you can, forget about it, and, sit back and enjoy the fact that in Bitcoin terms, you're going to get, in fiat terms, you're going to get richer and richer. As Bitcoin becomes more and more of a replacement for fiat, because it's just a much better form of money. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, some people think, well, it's this magic internet money or whatever it is, or it's a bubble, or no, it's none of those things. This is a technical innovation. This is the invention of provable digital scarcity. And so, I love the way, Saylor in some of his recent talks, he's talked about how, inventions happen and then they change the world, and they don't, you can't go back. But here we are, they've invented a form of money that solves the biggest problem that every form of money has had for thousands of years. For thousands of years, money has been debased, full stop. There's been no money that hasn't been debased for thousands of years. Even gold. Gold, it grows at 1.7% a year. In 40 years, there'll be twice as much gold on the planet. It gets debased. Now, that's a lot sounder than fiat, which grows at, in the U.S., 7 or 8% a year since 1971. But monetary debasement has just been a fact of life for thousands of years. Bitcoin just solved that. Totally solved it. Completely, and so I invested in it, right? And, do we know how Bitcoin's going to evolve and how it's going to get used? I mean, no, we don't. But we do know that Bitcoin solves the problem of monetary debasement. And that's been a very big problem in human society for thousands of years. And so we just solved it. So, okay, I'll bet on that. I think, I'm guessing that over time, individual free-thinking humans, just like you and me and all the other people who've adopted Bitcoin, are all going to look at it, are going to come to the same conclusion and go, you know what? This solves the problem of monetary debasement. I want some of that. That works. Let's use that. Why would I ever price something in fiat when I know that fiat is just, that it can get diluted? I'm not going to get paid back in real terms. I want to get paid back in Bitcoin terms. So, it's hard for people, I think, to get their heads around that. But I think once you do, there's really no going back, and I think, your generation is going to look back and think, I often joke about it. You can say, so the price of capital is the most, so capitalism is based on increased efficiency and increased productivity, right? That's what Adam Smith taught us. Supply and demand. The baker, makes everyone's life better because he bakes bread and he pays the guy who grew the wheat, and the guy who buys from him pays him, and so on and so forth. And so productivity, specialization and productivity, efficiency is what has brought all the wealth that we have in the world to the world. It's efficiency, okay? And so, the price of money. So efficiency is achieved by investing in the proper things to create productivity. I mean, basically, if you're looking for efficiency in money, if you're looking, so to get efficiency, you've got to invest in the right things. To invest in the right things, you've got to have the right price of the money. When you set the cost of the money at zero through ZERP, I mean, that's just a crime, because basically people can go borrow money for nothing. They invest in productive industry, and that's why billionaires are billionaires and the rest of us are paying too much for, okay?
Analysts see Bitcoin reaching $200,000, $300,000 this cycle, and possibly $1, $2M long-term, driven by liquidity, institutional inflows, and adoption. Despite volatility, experts like Raoul and Larry Leard stay bullish. With its fixed supply and ETF demand, Bitcoin stands as true digital scarcity. As adoption accelerates, Bitcoin and Ethereum are set to lead before altcoins follow, supporting the case for long-term exponential growth.
It's encouraging that we're making a lot of progress, and I'm not a big fan of all the other cryptocurrencies, but I do like the fact that the people in those cryptocurrencies are making a lot of noise the way we are. And isn't it interesting that, we were able to get Trump to kind of endorse the notion of being, pro-Bitcoin, recognizing there was a voting bloc there. And, we're obviously getting to the point where enough people are in this stuff that, it's a political bloc now. And politicians, there's one thing for sure, they want, and that's votes. And, if we've got a lot of votes and a lot of people make a lot of noise, it could have an impact. I mean, you grow something north of 10% and you compound it year after year after year, you get big, you get really big. That kind of growth is just, that's evidence that something's working. And you're seeing the same thing going on in Bitcoin, by the way, right? I mean, there's just enormous, adoption and growth and increased users, and ETFs are bringing all that. Let me tell you about a couple that I missed, all right? So Amazon comes along and Google comes along. And when I started my own fund, the first thing I did was, okay, I'm going to start looking for growth at a reasonable price. And I found it in India. We were doing cell phone providers that were growing 40% a year and trading at 3 times earnings. So that worked. Okay. But I was looking in the US as well, and I saw that Amazon was growing. So when I saw Bitcoin and I realized what it was a network of money, and it was growing, steadily and exponentially, and that everyone needs money, and that it is, truly the best form of sound money. I mean, as Saylor and Preston have said recently, there's no deflection in it. There's just 21 million of them, and that's it. It's just, to me, it's such an obvious, clear bet. And, you said price predictions. I mean, I have no idea where it's going tomorrow, or I don't know where it's going to be at the end of the year, although I'm guessing maybe 100K or something. But, I'm absolutely certain this is going to be 200K, and then someday it's going to be 1 million, someday it's going to be 2 million, someday it's going to be 8 million per coin. I'm talking that. Because that's just the natural progression of, the growth of a network. And so, that's why I'm pounding the table just to, and people getting into it, they think, well, I'm paying too much. I mean, I have a friend who's very, very wealthy, and, he knows my average cost is quite low, and, you just can't bear to pay 60 or 70 grand. I said, look, it doesn't matter. I mean, I paid, I don't know, whatever I paid, I mean, in the thousands for probably as an average. But, Max Kaiser was paying $2, and I don't regret Max. I just recognize that, someday my average cost is going to seem incredibly cheap to somebody who's paying $2 million a coin. So it's just, it's Saylor's point. I mean, it's going up forever, Laura. I mean, and so, I mean, you can either decide, you're going to buy it eventually. People don't realize that. Everybody's going to buy this eventually. I don't think anyone realizes, or I don't think a lot of people realize that. So you might as well buy it now versus waiting and having to pay a lot more for it in the future. Compare that to Bitcoin today, and compare that to the markets today. It's, as I said, the answer is somewhat nuanced, because I don't think it applies quite as directly to Bitcoin, because you don't have a ton of Bitcoin public companies, and you don't have, the crazy price appreciation. Well, you do have some pretty serious price appreciation, but you don't have, the nutty price appreciation recently that you had at the tail end of the experience with the .com companies. Where it does apply to today is in a stock like NVIDIA. Okay, I mean, I see, we're in a bubble driven by low cost money, and everyone post 2008, and I just tweeted about this. that's in the marketplace has basically, in the stock market, has basically learned to buy the dip. And, I'm here to tell you that bear markets do exist. And I define a bear market as something more than a 20% correction. I mean, recall that coming out of the 2000 bubble burst, the S&P went down 50%, the NASDAQ went down 80%.
Analysts argue that Bitcoin could rise to $200,000, $300,000 this cycle and eventually hit $1, $2 million long term. They point to liquidity expansion, ETFs, and adoption by institutions and even governments as the driving forces. Despite short-term volatility, experts like Raoul and Larry Leard believe Bitcoin's fixed supply makes it the ultimate shield against debasement. With Bitcoin and Ethereum leading the charge, altcoins are expected to follow as capital flows into the broader market. This accelerating adoption highlights Bitcoin's role as true digital scarcity and strengthens the case for long-term exponential growth. Do you think Bitcoin can really reach $1, $2 million in the next decade? Will Ethereum and altcoins keep up, or will Bitcoin dominate the market? Let us know in the comments.